It was 20 below. The morning officer Graham Weller didn't show up for duty. The Yukon highway was a narrow white corridor flanked by spruce and radio static. His patrol truck was found idling near the Takhini River, headlights still on windshield half frozen. Inside the cab, $2 million in unmarked cash stacked in vacuum bags and sealed with police inventory tape. But the officer was gone. No footprints, no struggle. Only the faint ticking of the engine as it cooled in the cold air. Within 24 hours, his name was quietly removed from the internal database. Files disappeared, then reappeared redacted. A month later, the warehouse tied to his last assignment burned down in what officials called an unrelated incident. No one ever proved where the money came from or why he'd been carrying it. Years later, a single keychain with his initials surfaced in an evidence lot mislabeled as scrap metal. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Snow had fallen hard through the night, heavy enough to mute the world. By 7 a.m., the only sound on the highway was the low hum of an idling engine and the slow crackle of ice forming around its tires. The patrol truck sat halfway off the access road, its hazard lights flashing weak amber against the pale Yukon dawn. Steam drifted from the exhaust curling upward before vanishing into the still air. When the first response unit arrived, the driver's door was closed, the cabin locked, and the heat still running. Inside, everything was clean, oh clean. The dash cam was missing the radio channel set to an unassigned frequency. A clipboard lay across the passenger seat empty except for one smudged fingerprint at the corner. In the glove compartment, wrapped in 2 layers of clear plastic, were 20 vacuum-sealed bricks of cash. The serial numbers had been rubbed faint, leaving only partial traces of ink. Officer Graham Weller was nowhere in sight. By 8 a.m., the site was cordoned off. Sergeant Mara Ellingson arrived from Whitehorse, her parka dusted with frost eyes scanning the snow for tracks. There were none. The last confirmed ping from Weller's duty phone came at 2:13 a.m., 30 minutes after he was scheduled to check in from patrol. The GPS record placed him exactly where the truck now stood. Nothing else after. She walked a slow circle around the truck, her boots pressing into the soft crust. The only marks in the snow belonged to the first responders. No drag lines, no secondary vehicle tracks. The ground was hard-packed, as if the snow had refrozen smooth sometime before dawn. Any sign of his weapon, she asked. Constable Ryan Kovic, still learning the edges of field work, shook his head. Issued sidearms missing, holsters in the truck. She nodded, looking up toward the tree line where the wind moved faintly through the spruce. And the cash, $2 million give or take, he said. Unmarked. Bills too new for circulation. No banding stamps. She studied the vacuum seal's industrial-grade heat-sealed edges. Not something a single officer could have assembled without equipment. He didn't pack this himself, she said quietly. By noon, the perimeter extended to the frozen river, drones mapping grid squares for signs of a body. Nothing. The Yukon sun hovered low, pale gold over white expanse, as if reluctant to rise at all. When they searched the truck's console, they found a single personal item. A tarnished silver keychain shaped like a small carabiner engraved with the initials DW. The metal had a faint scorch mark along one edge as though exposed to heat at close range. His name's Graham Kovic, said frowning. Who's DW? Ellingson pocketed the evidence bag, sealing the zip with deliberate care. We'll find out, she said. The report that went up the chain later that day was clipped procedural and bloodless officer, unaccounted for. No immediate signs of struggle. Vehicle secured, unexplained currency recovered. By evening, Whitehorse HQ had dispatched a forensic unit to photograph and catalog every item. The photographs were crisp, color-balanced, clinical. None of them could explain how an officer could vanish from a locked truck in the middle of an empty road. At 5 p.m., Ellingson stood alone by the embankment, watching the river ice shift beneath a thin film of wind-blown snow. She had seen her share of disappearances, hunters gone too far into the tundra. Avalanche victims' cabin fire remains, but this was different. The absence here wasn't natural. It was arranged. The air smelled faintly of diesel and something chemical oil maybe, or residue from antifreeze. The same scent that lingered inside the truck's vents. She scribbled a note into her field log. Possible solvent contamination. Air intake residue sample bagged. It would be tested later, another quiet fragment in an ever-thickening file. When the forensic tech finished his final shots, he lowered his camera and exhaled a thin cloud of steam. "You think he ran?" he asked. Ellingson didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the open road stretching north. If he ran, she said, someone helped him. That night, as the search teams withdrew, a soft snow began again, erasing every footprint and tire mark left behind. The truck was towed to a secure facility outside town, sealed behind chain link and plastic sheeting. The air inside the hangar was dry and fluorescent bright. Forensics began their inventory under slow silence. One technician noted something odd in the vehicle logs. An entry showing the truck's engine heat signature active at 2:13 a.m., then abruptly cooling by 2:19. The ignition key still in place, headlights on. The data suggested the truck had idled for roughly 40 minutes before anyone arrived. When Ellingson left the hangar, she paused by the office window. Across the yard, she could see the truck's silhouette under the floodlight door's closed hood, reflecting the dim orange of sodium lamps. It looked almost posed, as if waiting to be photographed again. She called in one last detail to the White Horse desk before heading out. Subject name, Graham Weller. Missing. Last known duty route 4 patrol ending 2 a.m. Discovered with unidentified currency totaling 2 million. Scene consistent with staged abandonment. The voice on the other end was steady, bureaucratic. Understood, Sergeant. File will be logged under temporary classification. By the next morning, the case file had a new label stamped in red internal, and somewhere between the printed pages and the central server, Weller's personnel file went missing. When Ellingson checked the roster that afternoon, his name was no longer listed among active officers. The wind outside was calm, the snow still falling in small, perfect flakes. By dawn, his name was already gone from the duty roster. The next morning broke without color. White sky, white ground. The entire Yukon seemed frozen in a single exhale. Sergeant Mara Ellingson parked outside the Weller cabin just after 9 a.m. The windshield wipers beat against packed ice, clearing a narrow slice of vision. Through it, she saw the house standing alone on a ridge above Lake Laberge, cedar siding, weathered gray smoke frozen in the chimney. No fresh tracks on the drive. Constable Ryan Kovic followed her up the steps. No signs of movement overnight, he said. Local detachment checked twice. Curtains never shifted. Ellingson nodded. "Let's keep it clean," she said, snapping on gloves. The door opened easily. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and cold ash. Everything was in order, dishes stacked, mail sorted, bed made. The floorboards creaked under their boots. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a neat row of framed photos, family barbecues, fishing trips, awards. In one, Weller smiled faintly, arm around his wife, Helen, holding up a trout. A small silver keychain glinted at his belt loop. "The same DW engraving?" wife Kovic asked. "She's in Whitehorse. School teacher. Took a leave yesterday," Ellingson said. "We'll speak with her once the inventory's done." They moved room by room. The cabin was spotless, too spotless. Not the sterile neatness of panic cleaning, but the deliberate order of someone who'd had time. The drawers were empty except for labeled receipts. The kitchen counter gleamed. Even the refrigerator was wiped clean. "Laptops gone," Kovic said from the study. "Docking stations here, power cords warm. Recent use." Ellingson bent to the desk. A faint ring of dust outlined where a hard drive once sat. "He took the drive," she murmured. "Not the computer, just the memory." Outside, the wind rattled the eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a snowmobile engine echoed briefly, then faded. In the living room, she found a locked footlocker beneath the couch. The key was missing, but a hinge gave easily under pressure. Inside lay only a stack of yellow envelopes marked with departmental seals, all empty. Forensics would later note the absence of personal papers, no journals, no pay slips, no financial logs. The officer's life, had been edited. At noon, Helen Weller arrived from Whitehorse, driven by a local liaison officer. She stepped into the doorway, still wearing her winter gloves, face pale, hair tied back, as if holding herself together by force. "Mrs. Weller," Ellingson said gently. "Thank you for coming. I know this is—" "Where is he?" Helen interrupted. Her voice was low, steady. "They said they found his truck." Ellingson hesitated. "We did. He wasn't there. We're doing everything we can." Helen's eyes moved past her to the mantel, to the photo of her husband. "He wasn't the kind to run," she said. "He always finished what he started." Kovich shifted uncomfortably, notebook in hand. "Did he mention any unusual assignments lately?" "Names calls late hours." Helen shook her head. "He didn't talk about work. Said the less I knew, the better. He'd come home, sit right there, clean his boots, and check the lock twice before bed. He said they were cracking down on something inside the division." "Inside," Ellingson repeated. He didn't say more. When Helen reached into her coat pocket, she pulled out a folded note. "He left this on the kitchen table the morning before he disappeared." The handwriting was quick, firm. "Back late. Don't wait up. Need to verify numbers." "Numbers." Ellingson photographed the note and slid it into an evidence sleeve. "Do you know what he meant?" Helen hesitated. "He'd been different lately," she said. "Quieter. Checking old files. There was a name he muttered once, Nor or Noran, something like that. Elias Knorr." Ellingson murmured, recognizing the name from an old audit report. Retired RCMP internal auditor, blacklisted after filing misconduct complaints. She made a mental note to find him. As they finished the interview, Helen walked slowly around the room, touching objects like confirming memory. When her fingers brushed the space on the wall where Weller's badge once hung, she froze. "It's gone," she whispered. The badge, the laptop, the records, all missing. By late afternoon, the light had begun to thin. The Yukon winter turned everything blue. Outside, the lake was locked under ice, the surface smooth as glass. Ellingson and Kovich loaded their evidence bags into the truck. The silver keychain photo weighed on her mind, the one from the fishing trip. She glanced at the cup holder photo on her tablet, where the real keychain rested in plastic, its metal dulled and scratched. "Looks like the same one," Kovich said. "So why'd he leave it behind?" Ellingson exhaled, watching her breath drift into the cold. "Maybe he didn't." That night, the forensic team compared soil traces from Weller's truck tires. The residue matched not the gravel of Route 4, but the pale dust found at an abandoned RCMP training site 10 miles west, a place decommissioned 3 years earlier after a warehouse fire. At 11 p.m., Ellingson read the lab note twice. No one had mentioned any official reason for Weller to be there. She highlighted the line, sample consistency, 94%. Location, Quarry Road, former training compound. She wrote in her log, subject's route deviation confirmed. Possible unauthorized stop prior to disappearance. Outside, snow fell again, fine and steady. The road glittered faintly under the floodlights. When she closed the case folder, she caught herself glancing at the silver keychain under glass, its initials still legible in the low light. The metal seemed older now, more corroded than before, as if time itself were accelerating inside the evidence locker. "Something about that key," she murmured. Kovich looked up from his desk. "Ma'am." "Nothing," she said, snapping the file shut. "We'll visit that quarry tomorrow." Across town, a power transformer hummed under frost, and in the silence between gusts of wind, the sound seemed to stretch thin, almost human, a low pulsing note that faded into nothing. The lights in the evidence room flickered once, then stabilized. The silver keychain caught the brief flash, reflecting a narrow blade of light against the wall. But the key in that photo was never found in his home. By the third day, the story had begun to leak. Not officially, just whispers carried on police radios and small-town rumor. In Whitehorse diners, people spoke in half phrases: the missing officer, the truck with the cash, something big buried in the department. The local paper printed 3 sentences under the weather forecast: RCMP confirms 1 officer unaccounted for. No foul play suspected at this time. Inside the temporary command office, Sergeant Mara Ellingson spread maps across a folding table. "We've swept the river, the quarry, and the cabin. Nothing. No body, no prints, no trace of exit." Constable Ryan Kovich nodded, tapping the edge of a satellite image. But if the soil from his tires came from the training site, he must have been there after hours. Why? Maybe to meet someone, she said. Maybe to deliver what he shouldn't have had. He hesitated. $2 million's a lot to vanish with, even for an inside deal. Ellingson didn't look up. Unless it wasn't his. By noon, the forensic report from the quarry came in faint traces of tire tread embedded in frozen dirt, but not from Weller's issued model. The print belonged to an older Yukon government truck fleet, retired 6 years ago. The numbers didn't align. Those tires don't exist anymore, Kovic said, reading the summary. They do. If someone kept the vehicle off the books, Ellingson replied. The same afternoon, she received an encrypted memo from RCMP HQ. All public communications to cease. Case designated internal. Release limited to authorized channels. The tone was clear containment. Outside, the snow thawed slightly under a weak sun, the first in days. Meltwater ran down the edges of the windows, blurring her reflection. In the distortion, she thought she saw movement behind her, just a shadow cast by the flickering light. At 4 p.m., she and Kovics drove to the old warehouse where the evidence had once been stored, one of the few buildings left standing at the decommissioned training site. The air smelled of charred timber and fuel, a residue that lingered years after the fire. Rusted filing cabinets lay twisted among debris. Fire report said accidental electrical, Kovic muttered. Doesn't look accidental. They picked their way through the wreckage. A collapsed section of roof left a cone of cold light over the center of the room. Ellingson crouched to pick up a warped metal tag. The stamp read, Evidence Storage, Unit D. She slipped it into the plastic sleeve. Weller's initials were DW, she said. He used to work out of this unit. Kovic scanned the blackened floor. If the money came from here, then someone used him to move it, she finished. Behind a half-melted cabinet, a stack of files had fused into a single charred block. The paper crumbled at touch, exposing a strip of handwriting barely visible beneath soot. Only 2 words remained intact, authorization pending. Ellingson photographed it before it disintegrated. The smell of ash filled the air, mingling with faint traces of oil. Later that evening, they returned to the station to find the internal system partially locked. Access to Weller's personnel records required clearance that neither of them had. The IT officer shrugged when asked. Temporary data migration, he said. HQ orders. Ellingson's jaw tightened. Convenient timing. That night, she sat in the motel room reserved for investigators' laptop, open to the archived patrol logs. Weller's route history appeared normal until the last 2 weeks before he vanished multiple detours to unassigned zones, each labeled with a single code, DEL9. When she ran the code through the regional database, the response came back blank. Not unauthorized, not redacted blank, as if the entry had never existed. She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. The heater clicked rhythmically beside the window, the only sound in the quiet room. She scribbled a note on the legal pad beside her DL9. Check NOR connection. Warehouse link. Just before midnight, an email notification flashed across her screen. No sender, no subject, only an attachment labeled Photo 17. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Better. The image was grainy, overexposed, taken at night. A figure in RCMP uniform stood beside an unmarked truck head, turned slightly away from the camera. Even blurred, she recognized the stance Weller's. In his left hand, a flashlight. In his right, a small silver keychain glinting under the flash. The metadata showed a timestamp 2 nights before his disappearance. She stared at it for a long time, pulse steady mind, cataloging possibilities, staged, archival, leaked. But none of it explained why the key in his hand matched the one found in his truck. At 2 a.m., the motel phone rang. Once, then stopped. When she picked it up, there was only static on the line, soft, uneven, like breathing, caught between frequencies. The next morning, she briefed Kovic. The warehouse was already burned when we got there, she said. But someone accessed it first. That photo was taken just before the fire. He frowned. Who sent it? No address. Could be internal. Or someone outside trying to spook us. Maybe both, she said. They printed the image and logged it under supplemental evidence. When Ellingson turned it upside down to examine the lower frame, she noticed faint letters stenciled on the truck's door, barely visible. Property of Yukon Government Fleet 72. The same defunct model that left prints near the riverbank. She looked at Kovic. Whoever drove that vehicle met him that night. Then the place burned. We're chasing smoke. He hesitated. Do you think he found something he wasn't supposed to? She didn't answer. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the frost on the window caught the hallway light and shimmered faintly. For a moment, it looked like silver. When they returned to the evidence locker to cross-check serial tags, the technician reported something new. The cash bundles, once clean, now showed minute fibers of black soot embedded along their edges, contamination from burned paper. From the warehouse, Ellingson stared at the sealed packages under glass. The edges looked darker than before, as though the evidence itself had begun to absorb the story surrounding it. She felt the quiet shift of air behind her as the ventilation clicked on. Somewhere deep in the system, a fan hummed, stirring dust motes through the fluorescent light. Kovic cleared his throat. So what now? We find what's left of Unit D, she said, before someone makes it disappear again. And as they left the evidence room, the overhead light flickered once more, just enough to catch the reflection of the keychain through the plastic bag. The metal gleamed faintly alive with cold memory. When they reached the warehouse, its records room was already burned. The air over Whitehorse carried the smell of thawing fuel and smoke even days after the warehouse visit. Sergeant Mara Ellingson sat in the narrow office assigned to her team. Blinds half closed, the light from the hallway cutting sharp lines across her notes. The brass plaque on her desk still read, Interim Investigator, Internal Review Division. Though everyone in the building knew the case had already been stripped from her hands in practice, if not on paper. Permission to access Unit D records is still pending, Kovic said, setting a fresh stack of printouts beside her. HQ says the originals were transferred to Ottawa for digital archiving 2 years ago. Except, he hesitated. Except what? The database shows they were signed out 3 days after Weller vanished. Ellingson's pen froze mid-line. By who? Someone using his login credentials. The silence between them was long heavy. Outside tires hissed across slush in the parking lot. Find out who else had access to his keycard, she said quietly. Then pull the visitor logs from HQ that week. If we can't touch the case file, we'll trace who did. At noon, a message arrived from a blocked number. Stop asking about Unit D. They burned it for a reason. Attached was a fragment of a scanned document, half a form, half a scorch. At the bottom, a partial signature, G. Weller. The ink bled into ash. Ellingson studied it under magnifier. The ink pattern suggested a different pen from his usual issue, the kind used for internal audits. He was signing something official, she said, but not his own paperwork. Later that day, she drove alone to visit a retired RCMP auditor named Elias Knorr, whose name had surfaced in Weller's wife's memory. Knorr lived on the outskirts of town in a small trailer surrounded by stacks of faded case boxes and rusted office chairs. He opened the door before she knocked. Didn't take long for you to find me, he said, voice dry as gravel. I'm not here officially, she said. I need to ask about an assignment, something called dry light. You knew Weller. Knorr studied her eyes sharp despite his age. He was one of the good ones. Believed in fixing rot from the inside. He motioned her in. They told him to audit seizure transfers, but when the numbers didn't line up, they pulled his clearance. Last I heard, he was trying to prove the missing funds were internal. Internal. Knorr nodded. Confiscated cash meant for evidence processing recycled through departmental accounts. He found the paper trail. Then he vanished. Ellingson leaned forward. Who signed off on the transfers? Knorr's thin smile flickered. That's the thing. The initials were his. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. He didn't sign those, Ellingson said. No, Knorr agreed. But someone did. You think they'd burn a warehouse for 2 million? Try 10. He walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder, half scorched along the edge. Inside were copies of old memos, some typed, others handwritten. One bore a faint watermark, Operational Logistics, Confidential. Beneath it, a date, May 2008. Knorr handed her a sheet sealed in plastic. He gave me that 3 days before he went missing. Told me if anything happened, someone had to keep it. The document was a transaction slip for seized currency inventory reference, DL9 signed under his name. The approval field below bore another signature blurred but legible enough, M.E. Ellingson's throat tightened. "Those are my initials," she said quietly. Nor nodded. "And I'm guessing you never saw that paper before." When she stepped back into the cold, snow had begun again, thin flakes sharp as ash. The air burned in her lungs. By the time she returned to the station, the hall lights were dimmed, the office half empty. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and laid the burned document flat under the desk lamp. The signature wasn't hers, but someone had forged it perfectly. She turned to the evidence bag containing the silver keychain. The metal caught the reflection of the lamp, revealing faint heat warping along one edge, the same kind of damage that came from high exposure to fire. At 8 p.m., her secure line buzzed. An automated voice delivered a single sentence before cutting out, "Check the incineration logs." The internal disposal records usually routine listed an unscheduled burn 2 nights after the warehouse fire. The signature authorizing it Weller's. Kovich found her still at her desk an hour later, coat off, hair damp from the melting snow. "You haven't gone home," he said softly. She didn't look up. "They're forging him alive." He frowned. "Ma'am, every form. His name, his signature, his authorization. They're using him to close the case from inside the system." The room seemed to tighten around the sound of that idea. "Ma'am, that's impossible unless someone still has his credentials," she finished, "or had them long before he disappeared." On her screen, the image of the burned lockbox from Unit D flickered open, a forensic photograph she hadn't looked at closely before. Beneath the melted latch, a half-visible number was etched into the frame, 722. The same prefix as the retired Yukon government truck. Ellingson zoomed in. At the bottom corner, the lock plate bore the faint imprint of a tool mark, circular the size of a key ring. She reached for the evidence bag again, pressing the silver keychain lightly against the image on the screen. The dimensions matched. The keychain wasn't just sentimental, it had been used to open the box, and maybe to destroy it. She exhaled slowly, the taste of metal in the air. Somewhere in the corridor, a copier started printing, though no one had queued a job. The pages spilled quietly into the tray blank forms, each marked with a red stamp at the top. Authorization pending. When Kovic stepped forward, the copier stopped abruptly as if aware of being watched. The silence returned. Ellingson gathered her files, placed the keychain back into its sleeve, and turned off the desk lamp. In the darkness, only the faint red light from the copier remained steady, pulsing like a warning beacon buried inside the system itself. Someone had signed his name 3 days after he vanished. By the next morning, the story had escaped its containment bubble. A low-resolution PDF began circulating through underground news boards, 3 pages of leaked RCMP correspondence referencing an operation called Drylight. The watermark read, "Internal use only," but the header had been cropped out. Within hours, a freelance journalist named Noah Rennick called the Whitehorse Division asking for confirmation. When the call reached Sergeant Mara Ellingson's desk, she said only, "You have the wrong number," and hung up. But the damage was already done. By noon, the leak reached local radio. Unconfirmed reports suggest the missing officer may have been connected to an internal financial investigation. The announcer read, voice steady, disinterested. Officials have declined to comment. Inside the station, Ellingson's superiors responded with silence. An email from headquarters arrived at 1:17 p.m. All inquiries regarding Operation Drylight are to be redirected to the Public Affairs Office. Disciplinary action for breach of protocol will follow unauthorized disclosure, meaning us, Constable Kovic muttered. Ellingson didn't answer. She was staring at a photograph from the warehouse fire, the scorched lockbox found among the debris. Its serial number had reappeared in one of the leaked memos. DL9 evidence container. Contained seized cash and internal documentation. The memo was dated 2 days after the fire. They listed it as destroyed, Kovic said. They also listed Weller as active, she replied. Outside, the snow had turned to slush. The sky hung low, yellow-gray like bruised paper. That afternoon, Noah Rennick showed up in person. He was in his 30s, tall coat, half-buttoned, carrying an old tape recorder. His tone was polite but insistent. "You're Mara Ellingson," he said. "You were at the quarry site, right?" She eyed the badge around his neck. "You're not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to have half of this either," he said, producing a folder. Inside were photocopies of 3 internal memos, each with partial RCMP headers and fragments of blacked-out text. One line was clear: funds untraceable, operation Drylight suspended pending audit. "Where'd you get these?" Anonymous email, Rennick said. "Same sender who sent you that photograph last week." Her pulse stilled. "You can prove that," he smiled faintly. "You just did." They met later in a diner off the main road away from cameras. He laid the papers between the coffee mugs. "Whatever this is, it's bigger than a missing cop. Drylight shows up in procurement trails, custom seizures, even military freight logs. They used evidence transfers as smokescreens." Ellingson stirred her coffee without drinking it. "You think Weller found out?" "I think he was meant to sign something he didn't," Rennick said. "And when he didn't, they made it look like he did." The window beside them reflected their faces pale against the gray light. Outside, slush streaked the passing cars. When she returned to the station, her access card no longer worked. The screen flashed clearance revoked. A guard at the door avoided her eyes. "Order from HQ," he said. "Temporary suspension." In her locker, she found an envelope, no return label, sealed with transparent tape. Inside were a set of photo negatives, the edges brittle from age. Each frame showed aerial shots of the same Yukon airstrip, unmarked cargo figures in police jackets loading crates under floodlight. The negatives were developed that evening in the evidence lab under Kovic's supervision. As the images came into focus under red light, the shapes grew clearer. One of the men wore a parka, identical to Weller's. "What's the timestamp?" Ellingson asked. 2:13 a.m., Kovic said. The same minute his phone last pinged. They stood in silence, the faint hum of the red light overhead. "Someone wanted these found," she said finally. "And they wanted us to see who else was there." The last frame showed a vehicle partially visible near the hangar. Its door carried faint lettering, Fleet 722, that number again. When she stepped outside for air, the snow had hardened into ice pellets. Her breath rose like smoke. A voicemail blinked on her phone. No caller ID. The message lasted only 8 seconds. A click, a breath. Then a woman's voice whispering, "Stop following ghosts." At 10 p.m. she met Kovic in the parking lot. "They'll shut this down by morning," she said. "We make copies tonight." They printed what they could, memos, negatives, receipts, and logged everything in an encrypted drive under a decoy case name Winterhold. While the files copied, she looked again at the evidence tray on her desk. The silver keychain lay under its plastic sleeve, catching the cold fluorescent light. Something about the way the initials DW curved reminded her of the signature on the burned form. Not identical, but close enough that in poor light one could mistake them. She reached for her notebook. Who else uses a DW signature pattern? Kovic frowned. "You think the keychain belonged to someone else?" "I think it belonged to whoever signed those memos." At midnight, she received an encrypted transfer from Rennick, a single page of metadata, traced from the leaked PDFs. The source printer was internal Whitehorse HQ. The timestamp matched May 12, 2008, 5 days after her own suspension notice. Someone inside was still generating new versions of the old files, rewriting the history line by line. Kovic leaned against the desk. "They're not just hiding the past, they're remaking it." Ellingson nodded. "And we're in it." When she finally unlocked the envelope that came with the negatives, she found a small plastic tag inside a locker key stamped DW. The tag number matched an unused locker in the evidence facility. They opened it just before dawn. Inside was only melted snow and one sealed envelope. The paper was damp. The ink smeared the flap, resealed with clear tape. On the front, in fading blue pen, were 3 words: "Don't trust records." She turned it over, expecting a return label or initials. There were none, only the faint imprint of a circle pressed into the paper the size of a keyring. That locker, when opened, held only melted snow and one sealed envelope. The envelope dried overnight in the evidence lab, the paper curling at the edges like a blistered leaf. Under magnification, faint impressions appeared on the back indents from whatever had been written on a sheet above it. Ellingson used a graphite film to lift the marks, revealing a few fragmented words. "Airstrip manifest photos. Keep copies off-site." She looked up at Constable Kovic. This wasn't a warning, she said. It was an instruction. They developed the remaining negatives in silence. The last 3 frames revealed a Yukon airstrip under harsh floodlights. A line of unmarked police vehicles idled on the tarmac, hoods up their reflective strips distorted by darkness. Men loaded heavy crates into the back of a van. The snow was churned into ruts by tire chains. The final frame caught the tail end of an aircraft civilian registration, but the serial number was partially obscured. Kovic squinted through the loop. "You think this is Weller's operation?" "No," Ellingson said. "I think he was documenting it." When they checked the metadata against the dispatch records, the airstrip location corresponded to an unused runway 30 kilometers north of town, technically decommissioned, but still under government lease. The timestamp 2:13 a.m. The exact moment Weller's truck engine last registered heat. GPS confirms his phone pinged from that same area, Kovic said, one night before he disappeared. Ellingson leaned over the light table. The negatives trembled slightly under the vent draft shadows alive in motion. "Get a drone team," she said. "We're visiting the site." By dusk, they reached the airstrip. The runway was coated in ice wind-sweeping snow in thin veils across the tarmac. The hangar doors were chained shut, a no trespassing sign flapping weakly on rusted hinges. Kovic clipped the chain with bolt cutters. The sound echoed through the empty field, then vanished into wind. Inside, the air smelled of oil and cold metal. Tire marks cut shallow arcs across the floor, ending at a loading bay smeared with dried coolant. "Fresh," Kovic muttered. Within a month, they moved deeper in flashlights, skimming over stacked crates labeled as emergency supplies, blankets, radios, non-perishable food. The labels peeled easily, revealing stenciled text underneath "Property of Yukon Government Fleet 72. "Same designation as the truck," she said quietly. One crate stood apart, its lid missing. Inside were strips of torn plastic identical to the vacuum seal bags that had held the cash in Weller's truck. The edges glistened faintly with oil residue. "Whoever used this place cleaned up fast," she said. "But not clean enough." They bagged a sample of the residue for testing. Beneath the crate, half buried in sawdust, something caught the beam of her flashlight, a small metal object, tarnished silver. She picked it up carefully with gloved fingers. It was a duplicate key. Same engraving DW, but newer, the surface less corroded. Same blank type as the one from the truck, Kovic noted. Factory cut, not handmade. Ellingson held it up to the light. The grooves matched the partial imprint on the burned lockbox from Unit D, so this was the access key, she said, to whatever they kept locked away. When they exited the hangar, night had fully fallen. Across the airstrip, faint tire tracks led toward the tree line, a recent departure. She crouched to touch the ruts. The rubber still felt soft, pliant from heat. Whoever had been here had left within hours. Back at the vehicle, her phone vibrated an unlisted number, text only. "You're out of your jurisdiction." She didn't reply. By midnight, the forensic analysis confirmed the residue sample contained traces of aviation coolant mixed with standard-grade motor oil, a combination used to disguise fluid leaks during unauthorized cargo transfers. "Means those planes were loaded hot," Kovic said. "Quick turns, no logs." Ellingson looked at the photo pinned above her desk, the grainy image of Weller on the tarmac, head turned Parker, hood up, the shadows of others around him blurred into motion. He knew they were running money, she said softly. He was gathering proof. A new email arrived in her inbox, no subject, no sender. It contained only a short message. "Ask Noor about the second key." She found Noor at his trailer before sunrise. He seemed to have been waiting. "You found it," he said without greeting. "The twin. How many were made?" she asked. 3, issued to auditors overseeing evidence accounts. One was Weller's, one mine one. He stopped, glancing toward the window, frost thick along the glass. One issued to headquarters, never logged back in. "You think that's how they accessed Unit D?" Noor nodded. "With the master cut, they could open every safe from Dawson to Whitehorse. The kind of authority nobody questions." Ellingson set the duplicate key on his table. "Then whose signature authorized the burn?" Noor smiled, faintly tired. "You won't find it on paper. They used the auditors as cover." When Weller got close, they erased him from the system, and the system obliged. Outside, the sun was a weak, washed-out disk, half swallowed by cloud. As she left, he called after her, "Be careful what doors you open. Some don't close again." Back at her vehicle, the dashboard clock flicked over to 9 a.m. The key on the seat beside her gleamed faintly in the gray light, reflecting her own face distorted across its surface. That evening, as she entered her notes into the secure database, the screen flickered. For a second, Weller's personnel file appeared on-screen, status line flashing active. Then it vanished. She stared at the empty search bar until her reflection filled it completely. One of those figures wore Weller's parka. 2 days later, the inquiry came down from headquarters. All personnel associated with the Dry Light investigation are reassigned pending review. Sergeant Mara Ellingson's name appeared at the top of the list. Her clearance was revoked. Constable Kovich's email account was locked. The Yukon file was officially labeled inactive. The silence from above was total. Ellingson packed her files into a plain cardboard box. When she reached for the envelope containing the aerial photos, it was gone. The evidence log still showed it checked in, but the shelf stood empty. Someone had cleared the cabinet overnight. Kovich appeared at her door, coat unbuttoned, expression drawn. "They're auditing us," he said. "You and me, everyone who touched the case. They even recalled the forensics team." She set the box down. "Let them audit. Maybe they'll see what we did." He hesitated. "You know that's not what this is." When she walked out of the building that afternoon, snow had started again, slow drifting flakes over wet pavement. At the curb, a dark sedan idled. Inside sat Noah Rennick, the reporter. He rolled down the window. "They shut you out too," he said. "Officially or otherwise?" she asked. He handed her an envelope through the window. Letters, postmarked Dawson City, all addressed to Weller's wife. "What's inside?" "They're blank," he said, "except for sketches of keys." Ellingson flipped through the pages, plain stationery, each sheet bearing a rough pencil outline of a single key. The same shape, same curvature, each page smudged at the edges by fingers. "Someone's taunting her," Kovic said, leaning over her shoulder. "Or trying to tell her something," Ellingson murmured. Rennick nodded. "She gave them to me last night. Said they started a week after the story aired." Back at her apartment, Ellingson laid the sketches across her kitchen table. There were 5 in total. The graphite pressure was uneven light strokes, in the first 3 heavier, in the last 2, as if whoever drew them had pressed harder each time. Under raking light, faint imprints became visible in the margin's postal machine timestamps from Whitehorse Correctional Facility. "Prison mail," she said quietly. "Someone on the inside sent these." Kovich frowned. "But why to Helen?" "Maybe she wasn't the recipient," Ellingson said. "Maybe she was the relay." They logged the envelopes into evidence. Forensics ran quick tests. The paper stock matched government supply inventory used in correctional offices. Ink composition matched batch 147B prison typewriters. That night, a new letter arrived, this one sent directly to Ellingson's P.O. box. Inside was another sketch, the graphite darker than before, the line almost gouged. The outline of the key was the same, but this time the head bore 3 initials carved into the drawing RCD. "Those aren't Weller's," Kovic said. "Or mine," she said. They checked the inmate database. One name matched the initials: Raymond C. Duran, a former RCMP mechanic, convicted in 2006 for falsifying fleet maintenance logs. He had been stationed at the same Yukon depot before the fire. At 7 p. Ellingson and Kovic drove to the correctional facility, snow clinging to their windscreen. The warden met them in the hall. "Duran doesn't talk to police," he said. "Tell him this isn't police," Ellingson replied. In the visitation room, Doran sat shackled at the wrists, eyes flat and calm. "You're late," he said, as if expecting her. "Did you send these?" she asked, laying the sketches on the table. He smiled faintly. "I draw keys when I can't find doors." She leaned forward. "You worked Fleet 72? You know what dry light was?" He looked past her toward the glass wall. Dry light wasn't an operation. It was a route. Money didn't move on paper. It moved by road and air, piggybacked on supply transfers. They kept it quiet by calling it audit recovery. Weller found the real ledgers. "Where?" He hesitated, tapping one finger against the table. He hid copies in a hangar, the one with the coolant stains. But he wasn't supposed to look. None of us were. Who gave the orders? His eyes shifted, the faintest trace of fear breaking through his calm. Ask yourself who owns the trucks now. They painted over the logos, but the keys still fit. She placed the most recent sketch in front of him, the one marked RCD. Then why send these? He studied it for a long moment. Because they still come looking for mine. Your key, he nodded once. I cut the duplicates. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, its flicker timed to the rhythm of her pulse. When she and Kovic left, the warden handed her an envelope addressed to ME with a return stamp from the same facility. It had arrived that morning undelivered. Back in the car, she tore it open. Inside was a folded scrap of lined paper with a single sentence typed in all caps. They keep the originals in the fuel drums. Kovic looked up. You think that's literal? Maybe, she said. Maybe that's where they've been hiding the missing ledgers. That night, she logged the prison correspondence and the sketches under miscellaneous exhibits. The paper edges were still damp from her hands. The next morning, another letter arrived at Helen Weller's mailbox. No return address, no handwriting, only a faint smell of aviation fuel trapped in the paper fibers. Helen called Ellingson, her voice trembling. It's happening again, she said. Don't open it, Ellingson said. I'll come get it myself. When she arrived, Helen stood in the doorway clutching the letter like something venomous. It was slid under the door, she whispered. Not mailed. Ellingson took it carefully with gloved hands. They're not done erasing him, she said. Outside, the air was brittle with frost. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum of engines rose and faded. The last envelope smelled faintly of aviation fuel. The drive to Dawson took 5 hours in clear weather, but that morning the wind carried fine snow like ground glass, cutting visibility to a few car lengths. Ellingson kept both hands tight on the wheel wipers, dragging over sleet. The highway twisted through low spruce hills where the ice along the river gleamed blue-gray under the rising sun. Beside her, Kovic watched the GPS cursor creep north. Why Dawson, he asked. Because that's where the letters came from, she said. And if they smelled of aviation fuel, the sender wasn't mailing them. He was flying them. By late afternoon, they reached the town streets, half-buried wooden storefronts, faded from decades of cold. The airfield sat on the far edge, fenced with rusted chain link, the gate padlocked, but the lock frozen open. A single hangar stood beyond paint, flaking its roof, bowed under ice. They parked the truck and stepped into silence. The only movement came from the distant shimmer of heat haze above the frozen fuel drums lined along the fence. Ellingson pressed the latch. The hangar door groaned open, spilling a weak band of light across the floor. Inside, it smelled of coolant and stale air. Dust floated like snow in the flashlight beams. A mechanic's bench stood near the rear wall, scattered with wrenches, stripped wires, and coffee-stained logbooks. Against the far side, a tarp covered a hulking shape. Another RCMP marked truck stripped of plates, tires, cracked with age. Fleet, 72, Kovic said quietly. Same as the quarry. She knelt beside the vehicle, gloved fingers tracing along the door panel. The paint had been recently sanded down. Beneath it, faint letters were still visible through the primer evidence transport. She opened the driver's side door. A brittle logbook lay on the seat, pages rippled from moisture. Inside, each line recorded cargo transfers, but the entries were inconsistent. Handwriting changed mid-page, ink colors shifted. The last 2 lines were different altogether. DL9. Manifest received a signatory. GW, DL9. Authorization confirmed. RCD, Doran Kovic said. And Weller, she added. But they never worked the same shift. She slipped the book into a bag and scanned the hangar. Near the center, the floor showed uneven stains, dark rings around a drain. She crouched, scraping a thin layer of ice from the concrete. The surface beneath was slick with a gray sheen. Oil mixed with coolant again, she murmured. They've been running something through here. When she shone her light along the drain, the beam caught on something metallic. Kovic fetched a crowbar, pried the cover open, and pulled out a rusted half key. The broken edge was razor clean, the D still visible. Cut deliberately, she said. Maybe to keep it from fitting a lock, he replied. or to make sure only one person could use it again. They logged the fragment, sealed it in plastic. The temperature inside the hangar had dropped below freezing. Breath plumed white in front of their faces. Ellingson examined the fuel drum along the back wall. Each was marked with faded stencils, the paint blistered. One stood out, brighter red, newer, sealed with a heavy screw cap. She tapped the side. Hollow. The sound was off too light. With a wrench, Kovic loosened the lid. The first thing that escaped was the sharp tang of jet fuel. Inside lay a stack of black binders wrapped in clear plastic. She lifted one out carefully. The spine read, Yukon Procurement, 2006-2008, restricted. Inside were hundreds of photocopied forms, requisition requests, seized currency transfer slips, all marked dry light. The signatures alternated between three names, G. Weller, R. Doran, and M. Ellingson. She stared at her own forged signature dozens of times over. They used us all, she whispered. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, soft, deliberate. Both turned flashlights sweeping across the hangar. A figure stood just inside the doorway, face hidden beneath a parka hood. "Who are you?" Ellingson called. The person didn't answer. They turned and slipped outside. Kovic gave chase, boots scraping on ice, but when he reached the fence, only the sound of an engine remained low, distant, fading fast toward the river. Tire prints bit deep into the snow, wide and fresh. "He was waiting for us," Kovic said when he returned, breath steaming. "Or guarding what's left," she replied. They secured the binders and key fragment, then locked the hangar behind them. As they drove away, Ellingson looked back. In the mirror, the hangar lights flickered once, then went dark. At the motel that night, she spread the recovered documents across the bed. Each page bore the same handwriting that had signed Weller's authorizations. The same looping G she'd seen forged before, but something new appeared in the margin's pencil initials, DW, written beside correction marks. She circled them, pressing the tip of her pen until it tore the paper. Whoever used his signature still had his key, she said. Kovic sat at the small table laptop, open screen, glowing pale blue. "These shipments half are listed as evidence, returns half as fuel deliveries. The destinations are all blank." She leaned closer. Someone built an entire paper loop. The heater rattled in the corner, barely cutting the cold. Outside, wind shook the window panes. "Look at this," Kovic said. 2 manifests dated the night before he vanished. One for a transport crate logged destroyed. The other marked returned to Fleet 72. Returned where? He scrolled down. No address. Just coordinates somewhere along the river. Same grid as the airstrip, she said. When she looked up, the red key sketches from Helen's letters were pinned to the wall above the desk. Each one seemed darker now, the lines heavier, as if the graphite itself had thickened. In the silence, she thought she heard the low hum of a plane engine far off, carried through the frozen air. They didn't speak again until after midnight, when the motel lights flickered once and went out. The only illumination came from the open binder on the bed. One page luminous in the glow of the laptop, showing the same 3 initials that had haunted every file, DW. Kovic touched the broken key through its evidence bag. The cut edge gleamed like a wound. The key had been broken deliberately, the cut edge clean and cold. By morning, the temperature had dropped to 20 below. Ice had formed on the inside of the motel window, webbing the glass in thin white veins. Ellingson stood at the desk, watching the steam rise from her coffee as the heater coughed weakly. Across the room, Kovic sat hunched over the laptop, the glow flickering across his face. "I ran the coordinates from the manifests," he said. "They line up with an old mining route abandoned after 97. The trail runs parallel to the Takhini River for 30 kilometers, which means," she said, "that's where the missing funds went." He nodded slowly. "And maybe where Weller was going that night." Ellingson packed the binders, sliding them into a duffel bag lined with plastic. "We drive as far as the road takes us, then follow on foot." The trail was barely visible under the snow. An old service route swallowed by frost and willows. The truck's tires sank deep into ice ruts, engine groaning. When the road finally narrowed to a ridge, they parked and continued on foot. The wind rose in long, low breaths, the kind that filled silence with movement. Half a mile in, they found it. An overturned supply crate lay half-buried beside the path, its label bleached but legible, Fleet 72, property of government of Yukon. The seal had been broken. Inside the same vacuum seal bags as before, empty slit cleanly along the sides. The smell of solvent rose sharp and metallic. "Offload point," Kovic said. Ellingson nodded, kneeling to photograph the contents. A set of tire tracks curved away from the crate, leading toward a clearing. There, beneath the thin snow, stood the remnants of a small structure, wood frame, half-collapsed roof. A single rusted sign leaned sideways, its letters ghosted with age, Drylight Logistics, authorized personnel only. The name hung in the air like a verdict. Inside the structure, paper fragments littered the floor, shredded forms, fuel receipts, torn photographs. One photo had survived mostly intact Weller, standing beside the same unmarked truck they'd seen in the negative snow swirling around him. Behind him, a blurred figure extended an envelope. When Ellingson brushed the soot from the corner, a faint watermark appeared along the bottom edge. Operational Archives, May 2008. She exhaled slowly. He met someone here. Maybe the one sending the letters. Kovic crouched, retrieving a single metal disc from beneath a plank. It was a microfilm cartridge, cracked, but still labeled Finance Audit 2007. They sealed it in a specimen bag. Back in Whitehorse, the local university still had an old microfilm reader. Under magnification, the cartridge revealed ledger entries typed in neat rows, columns of seized assets, storage transfers, and routing numbers. Some lines were blacked out entirely, but one memo stood out, dated 6 months before Weller's disappearance. Initiate secondary routing procedure, Drylight. Maintain operational cover via seized currency audits. Participants, badge 21771 GW. Auditor nor logistics officer, RCD. The next line chilled her excess currency to be stored temporarily under local jurisdiction until further notice. Under further notice, someone had written in ink that bled through the film, "Terminate audit. Reassign personnel. Close file." Weller found this, Kovic said quietly. He saw his name used to sign the very transfers he was auditing. Ellingson nodded. He probably realized the money trail pointed inward, straight to his own badge number. At the bottom of the memo, a note in different handwriting: ensure disposal of Unit D materials. Confirm via Drylight manifest. And in the margin, faintly penciled, DW authorization complete. She leaned closer. They didn't just use his name, she said. They used his key. That evening, she met Rennick in a dim cafe off Front Street. He had already printed copies of the leaked documents, now cross-referenced with the recovered ledgers. "It's not about smuggling," he said. "It's embezzlement through evidence laundering." Every destroyed shipment was funneled back into a private trust. Mining royalties, cash seizures, narcotics, money, all recycled through public accounts. Who ran it? He hesitated, glancing at the door. The signatures change every year, but the initials stay the same. DW used as a clearance code. Whoever started it built the system on anonymity. Ellingson opened her notebook. What about the others? Nor Doran. Nor reported irregularities. Doran kept the fleet running. Both were removed from access lists within a month of each other. Officially retired and terminated for cause. And Weller. Rennick looked at her. He tried to trace the routing path, then he vanished. He slid a small envelope across the table. This came to my mailbox yesterday. Inside was a photocopy of an internal memo stamped "Confidential, Financial Oversight Committee." The body of the text was nearly illegible under redaction lines, but one sentence was clear. Reinstate clearance for auditor designation DW, effective immediately. Reason, legacy continuity. Legacy continuity. Kovic read aloud. They're still using it. Rennick leaned in. There's more. According to the registry, the DW designation was never a person. It was a clearance role, departmental witness, a rotating signature to authorize internal evidence destruction. No one outside the finance office even knows it exists. Ellingson sat back cold, spreading through her chest. So every time a case closes with untraceable evidence, DW signs it. He nodded. and Weller was the last to hold that role. Until someone else took it. Back at her apartment, she spread the microfilm prints across the floor. The lines of text formed a pattern, payments looping back through shell accounts labeled Community Safety Grants. The same totals as the missing 2 million multiplied 5-fold. Operation Drylight, she said quietly, was never an investigation. It was a vault. Kovic stared at the columns of numbers. Then what were the hangars, the delivery points, she said. They weren't hiding the money underground, they were sending it back out through supply. The wind outside howled across the windows, rattling the frames. A loose page lifted from the floor caught in the heater's breath and fluttered to her feet. On it, a final line typed in faded ink, 3 DW tokens issued return pending. She turned to Kovic. "How many have we found?" "2," he said. She held up the broken key fragment. "Then one's still out there." The light from the desk lamp cast the metal in a dull glow. And 2 other tokens from that batch were never returned. Snow melted early that spring, but the river ice still held in gray slabs along the banks. The world outside the archive window seemed frozen mid-thaw, half in motion, half asleep. It had been 10 months since the official closure of the Weller investigation. Sergeant Mara Ellingson, now retired, stood in line at the evidence depot waiting to sign out her own memories. The clerk behind the glass slid a clipboard through the slot. "Purpose of access. Case review," she said. "Personal request." He shrugged and unlocked the rear gate. The corridor beyond was fluorescent white, lined with identical gray lockers labeled in numeric sequence. She knew the rhythm of these halls by heart, the hum of refrigeration, the faint smell of paper and dust. Halfway down, her eyes caught on a familiar label, Box 72-2. The same number etched into the lockbox they'd recovered years before. She knelt, fingers tracing the printed tag. The file log said destroyed 2008, yet here it was, catalogued under a new case number, E4137. She lifted it onto the table art, steady but slow. The seal tape crumbled at touch. Inside were only 3 items: a charred notebook, a cassette tape labeled Training Lecture, May 2008, and a small clear bag containing a melted key fragment. She turned the fragment in her hand. The engraving had warped, but was still faintly legible DW. "Full circle," she murmured. When she brought the cassette to the technician's desk, he raised an eyebrow. "That's ancient," he said. "Might take a few hours." "I can wait," she replied. He threaded the tape into an old player, pressing run. Static filled the room, followed by a thin male voice lecturing about chain of custody procedures, the language dry and rehearsed. Then faintly another voice beneath, barely audible at first, a whisper layered under the surface. "Can you isolate that?" she asked. The technician nodded, adjusting the equalizer. The second voice grew clearer. It wasn't part of the lecture.
"Seizures before HQ audit."
Ellingson felt the air tighten around her. "Rewind," she said. He did. They listened again. The background shifted, the sound of doors closing, the echo of metal. Then, same night, same runway. Move the coolant drums. Use the DW key. Burn the rest. The tape cut out mid-sentence. She stood motionless, the sound still humming in her ears. "Could be background chatter," the technician offered softly. "No," she said. "That's an instruction." The log on the tape case listed Recording Officer Weller G. Her chest constricted. "He was there," she whispered. "He recorded them." She spent the next 2 days alone, replaying the tape through noise filters, documenting each word. On the 4th night, she sat in her apartment curtains, drawn the city lights dim behind frost. She opened her old field log, the one she hadn't touched since the inquiry ended, and wrote in the margin, "Proof exists concealed as training audio." The silver keychain, long stored in her desk drawer, lay beside her notebook. She picked it up. Its surface had dulled with age, the metal pitted from oxidation. When she turned it under the lamp, she saw scratches on the back she'd never noticed before. Tiny marks forming a pattern of dots and dashes. She transcribed them, Morse code. When translated, the message read, DL9, May 14th. "Listen," the same week as the tape. She called Kovic. He had left the force, now running security audits for private firms in Alberta. His voice on the line was cautious older. "You still chasing ghosts, Mara?" "This one's still talking," she said. She played the clip over speaker. Silence on his end. "Then I was wrong. He didn't just get caught in it. He tried to stop it." "We can reopen this," she said. "The ledger fragments the microfilm, they'll match the voice pattern." He hesitated. "You know what they'll do to you if you start this again," maybe, she said. "But somebody forged my name on theft orders. I'm not dying with that file sealed." Later that evening, she sat alone, the cassette spinning on repeat. Between the loops of the lecture, she noticed something else, a faint metallic jingle barely there. She increased the gain until the sound surfaced clearly, the ring of keys striking a metal table twice in rhythm. She replayed it, closing her eyes. That same sound had appeared once before, background noise in the audio, recovered from the warehouse fire years earlier. Whoever had spoken on that tape was sitting at the same desk. She labeled the new evidence, audio correlation number 47, and placed it beside the melted key fragment. When she left the depot the next morning, dawn had just broken over the snowbanks. The sun was pale weak, but the light reached the horizon in a thin gold line. She paused at the door, watching dust drift through the slanted rays. Inside her coat pocket, the old silver keychain pressed cold against her palm. That night, she replayed the last 15 seconds of the tape once more. The voice was almost gone, swallowed by static, but she could still make out the final words spoken before the tape cut. "Weller." For a long time, she didn't move. The silence afterward was deeper than any answer. In the logbook, she wrote one final line: "Case remains active in absence of closure." The tape clicked to its end, spinning dry. The last word on tape was Weller's name. It was raining the day the last draft of the Drylight article landed in Mara Ellingson's mailbox. No sender, no note, just a brown envelope sealed with wax. Inside, a printed manuscript titled "The Ghost Audit." She knew the author before she saw the byline by Noah Rennick. The first paragraph hit like a confession. Operation Drylight was not an investigation, but an internal laundering mechanism, an invisible pipeline moving seized assets through false audits and terminated staff accounts. The final known auditor, Constable Graham Weller, disappeared in 2008. The records that followed wrote him alive again. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee going cold, as rain traced crooked lines down the window. The words on the page blurred in the dim light. Kovich called that evening. He'd heard from an old contact at the White Horse Division Internal Affairs had quietly opened a secondary review. Unofficial, unannounced, just to verify media claims. "They're not reopening the case," he said. "They're verifying how much he actually knew." Ellingson didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on a paragraph halfway through the article. Recovered ledgers suggest at least 6 transfers totaling over $10 million were diverted from evidence accounts between 2006 and 2008. Funds were reintroduced through community safety grants and regional procurement budgets. The original signatory, DW, remains unknown. Unknown. Even after everything, the letters still stood between fact and name like a wall. When she turned the final page, a small photo slipped out, grainy, taken from an angle near the riverbank. A corroded license plate half buried in mud, Fleet 72, scrawled beneath in Rennick's handwriting. "You were right about the coolant." The next day, she visited the old airstrip. The hangar was gone, razed to its foundation. Only a patch of blackened ground remained littered with shards of glass and charred rivets. Someone had erased the structure as thoroughly as the files. She crouched beside the debris. The soil still smelled faintly of fuel. From her coat pocket, she took out the silver keychain. Years of oxidation had darkened the metal, but under the soot it still reflected light. She turned it over in her palm, thumb tracing the initials DW. "You got closer than anyone else," she murmured. Behind her, a vehicle crunched over gravel. She didn't look up. A man's voice called softly. "You're trespassing, ma'am." The tone was polite, almost weary. She turned. The man wore a plain parka with no insignia, face shadowed beneath the hood. But she caught the glint of something metallic at his belt, a keyring old and tarnished. She straightened. "This was government land once," she said. He smiled faintly. "It still is." He walked to the edge of the clearing, stopped, then looked back. "Whatever you think you heard on that tape, it was procedure. Nothing more. "And the missing funds?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand slightly, the keys catching a sliver of gray light. Some locks aren't meant to open twice. By the time she blinked, he was gone, footprints already vanishing under the sleet. That night, she called Rennick. No answer. His voicemail played twice, then cut off mid-tone. The next morning, his website was offline. The cached version of his article displayed only a single paragraph before truncating, "Internal corruption is not a single act, but a system's instinct for self-preservation. The files don't vanish, they adapt." She printed that line and pinned it to her wall. Over the next week, anonymous documents began to appear in her mailbox. Photocopied financial records, stamped with new signatures, new initials, different names, but the same DW clearance code. The pattern was repeating itself. She documented everything, numbering each envelope, storing them in a fireproof box labeled Unverified Leads. When she mailed a copy to the ethics board in Ottawa, the package returned unopened 3 weeks later, stamped "Recipient no longer at address." Inside the returned envelope, her own name had been crossed out and rewritten in block letters, "Departmental Witness." She stared at it until her vision blurred. The rain outside turned to sleet again, tapping against the glass like faint code. Kovich called 2 days later. "I think you need to leave this," he said. "They've already rewritten the ending once," maybe she said. "But endings are just edits." He sighed, long and tired. "If they come after you, they'll make it look procedural. Just a reclassification." She looked at the evidence board above her desk. Aerial photos, burned memos, photocopied ledgers, the cassette reel labeled "Training Lecture." All the fragments that once seemed to form a map now looked like static, unresolved recursive. The keychain lay at the center of it all, half lit by her desk lamp. In the end, the truth was arithmetic. The numbers in the ledgers matched the missing bills from Weller's truck, 2 million multiplied across regions, laundered through bureaucratic precision. The kind of fraud that didn't need villains, only silence. Before she turned in the file to a lawyer friend in Vancouver, she wrote one final note across the cover. "The system cleans itself by erasing its own stains." She sealed it in an envelope, stamped it to be opened if found. The snow began again, soft as dust. The envelope came back stamped, "Recipient no longer at address." Spring arrived in fragments that year, melting ice by day, frost again by night. The river thawed unevenly, slabs of ice, drifting downstream like slow wreckage. 10 years had passed since Officer Graham Weller's disappearance, but in Whitehorse the case was still mentioned in low voices, never officially, always as weather talk. A young recruit named Liam Hart was surveying the Takhini embankment one morning when his boot struck metal. He knelt, brushing away silt and fragments of wood. Half buried in the thawing mud was a badge RCMP issue number, corroded but faintly visible, 271. Weller's. He logged the find, bagged it, and drove it to the evidence lab. The technician on duty, unaware of the case's history, filed it under unclaimed. No further action requested. When the report reached Mara Ellingson, now fully retired, she drove out to the site alone. The snow along the bank had melted into shallow pools. Birch trees stood thin and white against the pale sky. She parked near the old access road where Weller's truck had once been found. The air smelled of thawed earth and something faintly chemical, like old oil, rising from the ground. She followed the embankment until she saw the marker flag where the badge had been recovered. Kneeling, she pressed her gloved hand to the soil. It was soft now, almost warm. The years hadn't erased everything. The forensic summary had been brief. Surface corrosion, consistent with decade-long exposure. No biological residue present. Nearby soil sample contains traces of aviation coolant and cellulose fiber consistent with degraded paper. Paper fibers. She looked toward the river where chunks of ice knocked gently against the shore. "You kept something close," she said quietly, as if to him. When she stood, she noticed something glinting a few feet away, a small object caught between stones. She reached for it. A keychain. Silver, once now almost black with age, the loop bent open. The engraving DW was barely legible, half eaten by corrosion. The shape matched perfectly to the one she had carried for years. She held it up to the light. For a moment, it reflected the pale blue of the sky, not the gray of the water. She could have logged it, sealed it, filed it away again, but she didn't. She placed it gently back on the riverbank, the metal half submerged in meltwater. Some evidence belonged to silence. On the drive back to town, she stopped by the old archive, where the drylight files had once been stored. The shelves stood empty, replaced with new case numbers, new boxes. When she asked the clerk about the old series, he shook his head. Decommissioned years ago. Digital migration wiped most of it clean. Of course it had. She left the building and walked toward the edge of the lot. The snow was melting in rivulets, cutting tiny veins through the mud. She could hear the faint ring of a telephone through an open window somewhere inside, repeating endlessly, with no one to answer. Back home, her desk remained as it had for years. Files, sealed notebooks, stacked the cassette labeled "Training Lecture," resting in a shallow drawer. She hadn't listened since that final playback. Now she placed it in the recorder again. Static filled the room, followed by a thin hum. Then very faintly the sound of wind. It wasn't part of the original recording. It was newer, sharper, a hiss of air over open space. Then came a distant click, the sound of keys hitting metal. Once, twice, and then silence. She ejected the tape, rewound it halfway, and wrote a final note on the label, "Ambient Noise Unresolved." Outside, the clouds broke briefly, sunlight flashing across the window. Dust motes shimmered in the light, floating like tiny ash particles. On her wall, the evidence board had been stripped clean except for one photograph, the truck idling on the frozen road, headlights glowing through the dawn. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, the reflection of someone standing beyond the camera. No one had ever identified who took the photo. She studied it for a long time, her reflection merging with the image on the glass until it was impossible to tell them apart. When she finally rose, she slipped the silver keychain from her pocket, the one she'd kept, not the one left by the river. The metal was cool smooth. She placed it on top of the cassette and closed the drawer. Tomorrow, the archive would open again. The world would keep its shape. The case would remain unsolved, folded neatly inside the bureaucracy that had birthed it. At sunset, the light slanted across the room, striking the drawer. Handled the faint gleam of silver beneath it. In that stillness, even the air seemed to hold its breath. In the archive's cold light, the key still reflected nothing.